Hey, come on in,
Come
Bonnie.
on in, Bonnie.
I made it.
The tireless servant of Jesus.
She's not tireless. She looks pretty tired to me.
Yeah. Oh, she keeps going. She's got a big trip to Atlanta coming up too and everything. Yeah. So we need to pray for Miss Bonnie because she's doing important work.
And the real work starts tomorrow.
Yeah, I know. And then you go into Atlanta for all the wild partying and stuff.
Not wild partying.
I know. I'm just giving you a hard time. All right, guys. Well, let me find my glasses. We'll get started here. Just as a quick little review, last week we began our study of the tribulation period, beginning with the first seal. That was the first couple of verses in Revelation 6. Before that, we talked about the signs that the end is near that Jesus gave us. He called them birth pains, which means that we're going to have these signs, but they're going to get worse and worse and worse as we get near the end. And a lot of these signs carry into the tribulation period, proving that the end of the age of the Gentiles is really near. So as we studied these various signs, we came to realize that a lot of these signs are actually happening today or have happened in the last century. You know, everything that he talked about from world wars, which was just the very first one was in 1914, so last century, in the last 100 years. We looked at earthquakes and the frequency and intensity of earthquakes and how that has expanded so much in the 1900s and up till now, and famines and all the things that he talked about. Then we talked about the apostasy of the church, which is another thing that is a sign of the end of the times, where people are falling away from the traditional biblical teaching that Jesus gave us to teach and learn, and they're making up their own rules and their own morals and everything else. And then we saw that Israel's regathering just started in the 1900s. They were given back their status as a nation in 1948. And ever since then, Israel has been growing in population as people are starting to go back to their homeland. So all of those are signs. They're all birth pains, and all of them are growing as we get really close. And we're really close. Who was I was talking to? Oh, I was talking to Wayne Marcos last night, and he says, well, I hope you're about on slide 4 when the rapture happens, because we're all going to be gone and going to be sitting there looking at an empty room with the stand sitting on its side, you know. And I said, I hope so, brother. I hope so.
Come on
I'm looking
in.
forward to it. Hey, Gwen, come on in. Should I start back at the beginning, or you? Yeah. I'll get there.
Hey, I had 3 little ones. This
Did you?
morning.
Okay, you're forgiven then.
And then the oldest one was refusing to go into
Yeah.
his class.
So how would someone know when the tribulation has officially started? Well, we kind of talked about that. Daniel, when we studied Daniel a few weeks ago, we saw that the 7-year period of tribulation is going to happen and begin when a certain man makes a covenant with Israel. And that covenant will allow Israel to reestablish their temple on the Temple Mount, which is a big bone of contention right now. And then they'll be able to start animal sacrifice again. We learned that this man's called by many names in the scripture, but the one name that everybody seems to have settled on is the Antichrist. And we talked about that quite a bit last week. But the interesting thing is the actual signing of the 7-year covenant isn't recorded anywhere in Revelation. We get that from Daniel as we look at the details. But we do see the things surrounding that. We see signs of when that would happen. For instance, like in chapter 5, we saw that up in heaven that the Father handed Jesus a scroll that had 7 seals on it. And in chapter 6, we see Jesus opening each seal one by one. And the interesting thing about that is every time something happens where he opens a seal, something on earth happens. With one exception, we'll talk about that today. But so from the very first seal, we see the introduction of the Antichrist. He rides in on a white horse. He has a bow, but no arrows. And he has a crown, a wreath that was given to him. And so that's kind of his intro into the world stage. In Daniel, we saw that there was 10 kings. The world at that time was ruled by 10 kings. But an 11th little horn will come up, and that'll be the Antichrist. And he'll defeat 3 of those kings without any weapons right off the bat. And so he has a certain amount of influence when he first arrives. In fact, probably what gives him that influence is finally brokering a peace deal with Israel, which would create almost hero status on earth right now. Nobody's been able to actually broker any kind of a peace deal where Israel gets back all of their temple and they're able to start animal sacrifice again. So we saw that Jesus arrives, like I said, with a bow with no arrows. So he doesn't have the power yet, but he has the ability to be persuasive. But as we see today, as Jesus opens each seal, the Antichrist is given more and more authority. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But here's a spoiler alert, is all these four horses of the apocalypse, they're all ridden by the same man. They're ridden by the Antichrist. It's just him with more authority each time. So we'll see that too. So let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to start with the second seal. We did the first one last week. And the second seal starts with Revelation 6, starting with verse 3. And he says this, when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, come. Remember we talked about that when they want John to see what's going on earth, then they say, come, look at this. So the seal gets opened, the creature says, come, and John looks at the earth. So this horse symbolizes something different, though it becomes apparent very quickly that these symbols are connected. The first horse and rider symbolize the arrival of the Antichrist on the world stage. He arrives like a hero on a white horse, like I said. The world sees him as a peacemaker. He's brokering peace with Israel, and most people thought that was impossible, that would never happen. The white horse is a symbol to communicate the arrival of something, or in this case, someone. Likewise, this horse, the second seal, also communicates the arrival of somebody on earth. We're going to get into that in a minute. But the fact that it's another horse gives us a suggestion that these are connected. If you look at Revelation, all the other judgments, there's nothing, it's not repeated. But in this case, it's repeated. The first four seals are a horse, a horse, a horse, a horse. So they are connected. And there's good reason for that, as we'll see. One more thing to notice is that this was really an important detail. In verse 4, it says that he was permitted to take peace from the earth. That's a very interesting word. He was permitted. It tells us something important here. First of all, who's opening the seals? Jesus, right? Jesus is opening seals. So Jesus is in control of all this. He is giving the Antichrist permission to do what he does on earth. If you go back and look at the book of Job, Satan can't do anything without God's permission. He had to get permission to do what he did to Job. And so the same thing goes here, is that everything that the Antichrist does, this is all part of God's plan for this 7-year tribulation period. And remember, this tribulation period is for Israel to make atonement and redemption for what happened with the old covenant, the breaking of the old covenant. I see people fanning themselves. Is it hot in here?
Yes.
There's certain people are saying, the people that are iron poor blood are saying no, and other people are fanning themselves. So.
And the women are saying,
Did we turn it on? Is it on? I don't even know. We just need a little air. Would you take care of
That's
thing?
fine, I'd rather not be.
I'd rather be like you.
just hit on, David.
Put on 62.
Don't need
Oh.
Trying
It's
to
fall.
trying to put a quarter in.
Take it apart and rewire it.
All right, so notice the second horse is red. It's the color of bloodshed. In verse 4, we told that the effect of this horse and rider is to take peace from the earth. So that what peace would affect the whole earth? What would take peace from the whole earth? A world war. A world war is really the only thing that would completely take the peace from the earth. And so, like the first horse, the second horse had an unnamed rider. This unnamed rider is carrying a sword. But once again, we notice he's referred to as he. And we talked about that. We went back in Scripture to find out last time we saw an apocalyptic message with a he in it was back in Daniel when it was referring to the Antichrist, the person who actually signs the 7-year deal with Israel. So we know that this is the same person. This is the Antichrist. And we'll soon see that all 4 horses of the apocalypse carry the same rider, just like I said before. So the Antichrist's rise to power is progressing with each seal that Jesus opens. He gets more and more powerful and has more and more permissions as Jesus opens the seals. The first seal brought him on the world stage with a threat of war, but no arrows. But notice now he has a weapon. Now he has a sword. And he's delivered on the threats that he made the first time around with an actual war breaking out. Men are slaying one another as a war erupts on earth. So this is actually World War III breaking out here, and a new birth pain that Jesus had foretold. These judgments don't sound particularly devastating at the moment, but if you stop to think about the devastation that was caused in the world by just World War II, you can realize that a war that's worse than World War II would bring great devastation. And remember, these are like birth pains, so they do get worse and worse. This World War will be worse than World War II was, and this is speculation. The Bible doesn't say this, but perhaps it's a nuclear war. Yeah. Perhaps nuclear weapons are involved this time around, and not just to end a war, but like all the way through. So imagine the bloodshed and fallout inflicted by a world nuclear war. First of all, millions of people are killed right off the bat, and those that are left behind are left suffering. And the effect on farming, ranching, and the economy as crops fail, as livestock die from radiation poisoning, transportation is affected, as bridges and everything and infrastructure is blown up. It'd be a huge mess. It'd just be a huge mess. And that leads us to the next seal judgment. Look at verses 5 and 6 of our passage here. It says, when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, come. And I looked, and behold, a black horse. And its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine. So Jesus continues to open the scroll, and another seal separates, leading to another phase of calamity on the earth. Once more, John is instructed to look down at the earth to see the results of this seal being broken. And as he looks, he sees a black horse with a rider holding scales. Again, the rider's unnamed, but it's referenced as the pronoun him. So him or he. So again, we have to know this is the Antichrist again. And as we learned in the earlier 2 horses, that character hasn't changed. So we're looking at the impact of the Antichrist rise upon the earth as Jesus propels him up the ladder of power and gives him more and more abilities and power. So we have to consider, we don't know exactly what the color of this horse means, but if we start looking at it in context, then we'll start figuring it out. So looking at it in context, you with me, man?
Man, James did something.
Uh-oh, someone's in trouble. All right. Somebody waiting in the hall for him. So looking at this in context, look at what the man's holding. Scales. Now these aren't the lying bathroom scales that are in your bathroom that lie all the time, that never give you the correct weight. No, these are a different kind of scales. These are balanced scales. And in ancient times, the monetary system was based on bartering goods whose value was established by weight. And so a scale was used to establish and compare the value of an item for sale or a method of payment as a known value. So an object of a known weight would be placed on one side, and then the thing that's being traded would be placed on the other side. When they two balanced, then you knew that you had the right amount. So that was very important in ancient times, this scale balance. And something interesting in my studies that I learned is that they also weighed the coins. The coins that were used back in those days were made from precious metal. And so they were made of silver or gold. And without them weighing the coins to make sure that they were right, the merchants could get gypped, because what would happen is people would shave a small amount of that precious metal off of each coin until they could gather enough of that metal to be able to spend it. So they would weigh the coins, and if they were too light, they'd say this is no good and throw it back at them. So that prevented that from happening, which I just thought that, I mean, that has nothing to do with this, but I thought it was interesting. So at this point, we see a pattern emerging. We see a person arriving on a white horse threatening war, and then that becomes the trigger for the next phase, which is a devastating world war, which leads to bloodshed, the red horse, and then we see possible nuclear war bringing widespread death and destruction. So we have the normal expected consequences. The onset of war always is devastating for the economy and for the world. And the worse the war, the worse the impact. So the effect of World War III will be a severe scarcity of goods. It will naturally cause supplies to decrease. And with a decrease in supplies, prices increase. And we see the price increase reflected clearly in verse 6 as the world endures unprecedented inflation. They call it, it's probably bigger than hyperinflation. John's told that a quart of wheat and 3 quarts of barley would cost a denarius. The denarius was the backbone of the Roman currency system. A day laborer would basically earn 1 denarius a day. That was basically the norm. And in John's day, a denarius would buy 12 quarts of wheat and 36 quarts of barley. And so, but now it only buys 1 quart of wheat. So a quart of wheat produces about 1.5 loaves of bread, which is enough food to feed a family for a day. So in John's day, a poor family could subsist on for almost 2 weeks on a denarius worth of wheat, or even longer if they had barley. But by comparison, today's day laborer, say a person working for $15 an hour, earns about $120 a day before taxes. And a day's wage today, if it's spent frugally, can support a family with basic food for a few days, or maybe a week if you eat a lot of top ramen, which is what I survived on for a lot of years when I was young. But under the Antichrist, the world experiences what's called runaway inflation, even for basic goods like wheat and barley. As a result of the Antichrist war, a denarius only buys 1.5 loaves of bread. So the equivalent for us today would be about $160 for a loaf of bread. So if you think about it, if a loaf of bread costs $160, how expensive would things like meat and cheese and milk be? So we need to ask, what will be the impact of such hyperinflation? Well, the answer is obvious. There's going to be panic. There's going to be rampant crime. There's going to be looting. There's going to be starvation for many. This large-scale world war will naturally bring huge pressure on the food supply, on the infrastructure, on everything. So it disrupts food production and distribution. And if you think about it, armies consume large amounts of supplies, leaving precious little for the civilian populace. So the black horse symbolizes the death of many from war-induced hyperinflation, and the result is global starvation as people just do whatever they can to try to feed their family. And interestingly, 2 products are specifically excluded. Did you notice that? It said, save the wine and the oil. And it's not really clear scripturally why these are excluded, but most biblical scholars have speculated on it. And the answer I prefer is that these are the chief crops in Israel, and they come from olives and grapes, which represent Israel. And therefore it may indicate that the land of Israel is spared to some extent from this world war. Actually, it makes sense since the Antichrist's rise to power comes from an agreement with Israel. So for now, at least, it seems that the agreement might be protecting Israel from the war ravaging the world. But I will say it's not their time yet. There will come a time soon after this, as we'll see, when Israel is attacked from every nation all at once. And it's going to be an ugly, ugly thing. But for now, they're spared. Okay, so I told you this was going to get rough.
That's what about the voice in the middle? They heard the voice that stated the barley and the wheat.
Yeah, well, that's going to be
God?
probably Antichrist saying that, because he's saying this is now the prices for things.
Okay.
He's kind of running things, so
Okay.
yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so I told you it's going to get rough, so here, that was the easy part. So anyway, we're getting into rougher and rougher territory. So now the 4th seal. He opened the 4th seal, and I saw the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by the wild beasts of the earth. So the 4th seal brings another horse with another rider, but we still know it's the Antichrist. We're still looking at the step-by-step impact as the Antichrist is given more and more power and authority. But this horse changes the pattern slightly because now the rider has a name, and the name is Death, and following him is Hades. So we're looking at a horse with a rider, and still it's a series of horses, so there's still a connection. But by naming the rider and the addition of a follower adds some new mystery to it. So we have to look into that. The addition of Hades has led some to conclude that there are really 5 horses here, but the interpretation, if taken properly, misses the larger picture. That's not the interpretation. First, remember the pattern was established in the first 3 seals. Each horse with a rider represented something that the Antichrist accomplished on earth. So notice that the rider of the 4th horse is Death and Hades. Well, obviously Death and Hades aren't real people. Death is a condition and Hades is a place. And so that's not what it's talking about. So the logical interpretation of the final horse is that we're seeing the final ultimate effect to the Antichrist's rise in power. And all of this, as you've seen, is leading up to that. It will bring widespread death upon the earth, all connected to World War III. And the effect of death for the unsaved, unbelieving person is where? Hell or Hades. So that's what this is saying. And that conclusion is supported by the horse's color and by what we're told in verse 8. So the first horse color is described as pale in our English Standard Version of the Bible, also in the King James and New King James Version. The suggestion of the color is the color of a human body many hours after death. Once all the blood is not flowing anymore, a person's color turns very, very pale. And in my career, I've seen dead bodies, and so that's the truth. The pale horse represents the stench and rot of dead bodies left unburied. And because in verse 8 it says that the overall toll of the war, famine and pestilence resulting from the war, leaves 1/4 of humanity dead. So you have to imagine what that would look like. Today's population count, when you look it up, that would mean that around 2 billion with a B people are dead. They died in this world war. 2 billion people. By comparison, the highest estimate of the death in World War I was 22 million with an M, and the dead in World War II was 56 million. So now we're talking 2 billion people. And clearly the next war will result in unimaginable devastation, just as Jesus' birth pain suggested. So these deaths are a result of the culmination of the first 4 seal judgments, as explained in verse 8. Wars, famine, pestilence, and even wild beasts. You know, if you think, why does it say wild beasts? Well, they're starving too. They don't have food supply either. So us humans start looking pretty darn good to them. And so that's a possibility that could happen. So here's another one of my famous charts you guys love so much. But so looking back at the first 4 seal judgments, they're obviously connected together as a group. All are brought in a similar fashion on symbolic horses. Each judgment builds naturally upon the prior judgment. It gets worse and worse. But what's interesting is that from the perspective of those living on the earth during this period, these events will appear to be totally man-made and natural. They won't see anything supernatural. Nothing has indicated to them that this is from God yet. So these are easily explained as just man-made things. The world doesn't know it yet, but these devastating events are simply the warm-up act for the rest of tribulation. This is nothing compared to about what's about to happen, as we'll see. So I'm telling you, fasten your seatbelts because it's going to get a lot worse. Now we're going to move on to the next seal, which is the 5th seal, and we're going to see a little change here. But let's read it. It starts with verse 9. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. So this one, there's a lot of information in this one, and we're going to talk it through. The 5th seal breaks the earlier pattern of horses entirely. There's no horse in this seal. And notice also it breaks the pattern of John being told to come look at the earth. the scene stays in heaven for this entire seal. John mentions an altar, and meaning it's a place of significance in the temple. An altar is a place of sacrifice. And so the presence of an altar in heaven tells us that this is the place of sacrifice. And in heaven, the only place of sacrifice is the heavenly tabernacle. In fact, if you look at Hebrews 9, it tells us that Christ is the high priest presiding over this heavenly tabernacle, and his blood was the sacrifice. And so under this altar, John sees the souls of martyrs, meaning these are the disembodied spirits of believers. So that brings up some very important questions for us. The first of which, we know these can't be church saints, since the church saints will have glorified physical bodies after the rapture. So we're there, but we have our glorified physical bodies. These are spirits. So that leads us to believe that these spirits died after the resurrection of the church, which means they died during the tribulation. And secondly, it says that they were killed or martyred because of the word of God, because they maintained their testimony. So clearly these are believers. So we know that all believers were removed from the earth when Jesus came for the church at the resurrection. So that really produces a big question here. And the big question, I think somebody brought it up earlier, is how did these believers come to a believing faith if there's no Christians remaining on the earth? Who was evangelizing? Who was talking to these people? Who was telling them about Jesus and the gospel? Well, we're going to answer that later, because I know that's a big question. Notice these souls are asking for justice for their death. So obviously they're victims of an injustice that happened on earth. Yet they're told that there will be even more martyred. They're saying, hold on, you'll get your revenge or vengeance. There will be justice, but we have to wait till the number's complete. So there's many more martyrs to come, is basically what's happening. And so we've got a party going on. So that means that these are merely the first believers to be martyred during the tribulation, and there's a lot more to come. So that's what that means. So taking these facts together, we can also see that Jesus is barefooted in heaven. So that's a good thing. It's kind of dressed casual. So I don't know. This is just one of the pictures I found. But so taking these facts together, we can make several conclusions concerning these souls. First, the souls were believers. Okay, they were believers on earth. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in heaven following death. They would be in Hades. The unbelievers go to Hades. Believers, when they die, their spirit goes to heaven to await their body, their glorified body. So that means that new faith has arrived on the earth. If the whole church was raptured, then somehow new faith arrived on earth the weeks following the church's removal. And they came to a saving faith during the tribulation period. So again, that leaves us wondering, how did faith come back to the earth if the whole church is gone? There's no believers to evangelize. How did they come to a believing faith? We'll get to that in a minute, a little late. Secondly, this shows us that believers on the earth during the tribulation will be targets for persecution, even to death. Scripture says they'll be killed for their testimony. So that means that a willingness to identify as a Christian puts a person in mortal danger during the tribulation. Furthermore, there are more to come. These are merely the first of a larger number who must be killed for the same reason, because of their faith in Christ. So never has it been more true that death is a blessing for a believer than it was for these believers that are saved during the tribulation period. So we must understand that this seal is not just a single moment in 7 years, but rather it's a summary of the whole 7 years. This seal covers the whole 7 years of what's in store for most believers who will come to faith during the tribulation, unfortunately. Just like we learned about this a little bit in Daniel 7 when we were studying it. He says that as for the 10 horns out of this kingdom, 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be different from the former ones, and he shall put down 3 kings. We know we're talking about the Antichrist. And he shall speak words against the Most High, blasphemy, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. New King James Version says, and King James says, he shall persecute the saints of the Most High. and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. So the persecution of the saints isn't limited to a single moment in time, but as the text says, there'll be more to come, much more. In fact, it'll get worse toward the end of the tribulation than it is at the beginning. And millions will be saved and martyred for Jesus during the tribulation period. In fact, according to Daniel, that martyrdom again gets worse during the second half of tribulation. So this seal judgment represents the death of believers in the tribulation. This seal, really, if you looked at the fourth seal and the fifth seal, a lot of people are dying, but in the fourth seal, the people that are dying are going to Hades.
Yeah.
So that represents all the unbelievers dying. The fifth seal represents all the believers that died during the tribulation period. So, how do we know that? Well, the destination, like I said before. So we know that. The unbelievers go to Hades, and the dead saints find themselves under the altar throne of God, waiting for their glorified bodies. But God tells them that it will come, and there will be more tribulation saints to be martyred. So, now we have our fifth seal judgment along the bottom. Bonnie, have a good one. See you later. God bless you.
I finished this online.
Oh, okay. All right. I know, I like to go back online and watch myself because I'm like, what did I say? But these two seal judgments, the fourth and fifth, are set against one another to make it clear that both unbelievers and believers are dying by the millions. That's the whole bottom line of these two seals. The circumstances of each group is different, just as their destinations are different. But the direct cause and the indirect cause are the same. Jesus is the direct cause by opening the seals and giving the Antichrist more and more permission. And the Antichrist is the indirect because of all the billions of people that he's killing in these world wars and stuff. So, again, we got to ask ourselves, where do these saints come from if all the believers were raptured prior to the tribulation? Who's here to witness to them? How do they hear the gospel? Well, we'll get to those answers soon, I promise. But first, we need to move to the sixth seal. I want to get through all the seals, and then we're going to talk about that. So here we go. So, verse 12 says, he opened the sixth seal. I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that's being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. So now for the first time we see the seal judgments resulting in something that's clearly supernatural.
Right.
There's no man-made explanation for this part. Increasingly the judgments are that God brings to the earth will take supernatural form. There'll be a series of unimaginable, cataclysmic?
Pretty good.
Cataclysmic.
Yeah.
Isn't cataclysmic when you become a Catholic? You go to
You
cataclysm?
take your first catalyst.
See how I get off, my mind does weird things. But anyway, upheavals of nature and physical earth. So, like the Old Testament prophet said, these events will be unlike anything that's ever happened on the earth before. No one's ever seen anything like this. But as the supernatural evidence piles up, the world will soon recognize the events are coming from a God in heaven. But guess what? That recognition will not have the results you might have expected. They still don't turn to God. They still reject him. And so the sixth seal brings earthquakes, devastation, deadly objects fall from the sky, disturbances to the moon, sun, and stars. Well, it's kind of like, notice, first of all, the sun becomes black. This can't be a simple eclipse because scientists know when the eclipses are going to happen years and years and years in advance, but no one expects this one. It's totally unexpected darkening of the sun. It just goes dark for no apparent reason. Must be some other explanation of the darkening sun, which produces meaningful devastation on the earth. The moon becomes red, which is unusual because if the sun is darkened, the moon gets its light from the sun. So here we got a darkened sun, but we have a red moon. So that tells us a very interesting thing. There's a message there. It's supernatural. Next, we're told that the stars fall to the earth. But immediately we have to rule that out as being a super literal thing. A star in the universe is actually a sun, therefore due to its size, a star can't literally land on the earth, much less many stars. But from the perspective of somebody standing on the earth, it appears as if stars are falling, meaning that these stars are probably going to be meteor showers striking the earth with devastating effects. As they enter the atmosphere, they glow bright, and it's going to look like someone standing on the earth is going to look like stars falling. Then John describes the splitting and the rolling up of the skies, and the mountains and the islands move. These things boggle the mind. We can't even imagine what it would be like to see an entire mountain shift out of place, or an entire island shift. Movement of islands and mountains, even a short distance, would utterly obliterate anything on or near them. The tremendous forces of a movement like that would be, I guess the best way to picture that you made a nice sandcastle, and the child wants to just move it an inch. When they move it an inch, what happens? The whole thing would collapse. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. It's going to just basically leave everything around it as piles of rubble. Some scientists have tried to understand what would happen if the sun suddenly stopped shining. The effects match kind of what we see here. First of all, the Earth's temperature would plunge to 100 degrees below zero with just within a few weeks. And plunging temperatures at the Earth's surface would lead to hurricane-force winds around the planet. The atmosphere would undergo predictable and violent changes as temperature variations swing wildly. And the sudden cooling of the Earth's surface could draw heat from inside the Earth core, causing magma to come to the surface and destroy mountains and everything else. So wouldn't be a good environment to be in.
You'd also lose oxygen because photosynthesis wouldn't occur.
Exactly, yeah, that's right, yeah. All the dead trees and plants and everything, yeah, exactly, that's a good point. So here we are with the sixth seal opened by Jesus, and we can only imagine what a mess the earth is in at this point. And this is the milder side of tribulation. Wait till you see the second half. This is the easy part. This is tame by comparison. So before we close, I know we're a little over. I want to finish out chapter 6. It's real quick. Then we'll close. But so it finishes up. Chapter 6 says, 15 says, then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone slave and free hid themselves in the caves among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne. This is interesting. Face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For a great day, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? These are the people of the earth, the kings, the powerful. This is all the people that have rejected God. But notice now, this is interesting, that they're saying they're experiencing the wrath of God and the Lamb, and the great day of wrath to come. It wouldn't take a genius to conclude that these things are coming from an unhappy God.
Yeah.
But it still begs the question, how did they come to understand that this is the result of God, and more importantly, his son, the Lamb? If the whole church was raptured, and no one's here to tell them that this is the wrath of God and that this is the Lamb of God, Jesus, how do they know that? This would take someone who knows Jesus and knows biblical prophecy. If they hadn't sat through my class, how would they know? How would anybody know anything? But so how did these tribulation saints come to a believing belief in Jesus, a saving belief in Jesus, if the entire church is gone? And we learn that the church is taken before the tribulation. So who's explaining this to people? Who's telling them about the gospel? And that's our cliffhanger. As some of you have already guessed, I'm going to answer that question first thing next week. But if you're the kind of person that likes to charge ahead and try to get the answer ahead of time, read chapter 7 of Revelation, and you'll get your answer of where it comes from. Anybody got any thoughts, questions, last minute prayer requests? Go ahead, Joe.
Back to the fourth seal, when I talked about pestilence and famine
Yep.
and wild beasts. I read a neat theory that, of course, you lost a quarter of the population.
Right.
You're going to lose a lot of wildlife, because they have no inhabitant to live in. Rats.
Right.
Rats.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're like cockroaches. They'll live through anything. Look at the bubonic plague and how rats
Yeah.
have always been disease carriers. That's what I was read that to could be the wild beast.
That adds a new dimension. You try to sleep, and next thing you know, something's chewing on
Nibbling
your
at your
toe.
feet.
Oh, that's a good thought I'll leave you all with for nightmares tonight when you go to
When you
bed.
feed your rat.
Does all this, and we probably already went over this, does all this happen immediately after the rapture, or is there a time?
That's a great question. This is actually a time period of the first 3.5
Okay.
years, except for the one with the martyrs. That's the entire tribulation period kind of being summed up. But this is actually over a 3.5 year period till we get to the mid-tribulation.
Okay.
And,
So it's the first half.
This is the first half. This is the first 3.5 years. So it is. And the other thing someone else brought up a few weeks back was, will the tribulation begin directly after the rapture? It could be a few years before the tribulation starts. Before that, what's the tribulation start? The signing of the peace agreement. So, you know, the rapture happens, and then it could be a year or two. Who knows? Or it could be immediate. I kind of personally think that the rapture is going to cause such an upheaval in the earth that with millions of people just disappearing suddenly, those people are running power plants, those people are flying big jets, and it's going to cause a lot of upheaval. And people are going to be looking for someone to get everybody together. They're going to be looking for someone to take charge and get us back to where we were before. Think about after Katrina, we all just wanted things to get back to normal. And we were, I mean, it was like, you know, that's what happened, you know.
Hey, but we'll be in the front row up in heaven.
Yeah.
The third horseman, death and Hades followed,
Yep.
and it said they. Do you think it could be the people in Hades following behind him?
No, it's just Haiti, just, it's their destination.
Yeah.
And it's just showing it's unbelievers.
With death came
that they're
Hades.
talking about in that seal. The next seal
But
is,
after it says they followed him. But it's just, my brain picks up that maybe all the dead people out of Hades
yeah.
followed
Nah,
behind him.
I didn't get
killing
it that
people.
way.
Okay.
It may be, but I didn't get it that way.
Okay.
I was just thinking about, just like you mentioned, Katrina and all the devastation from that, floods and stuff from
Right.
the hurricane, and that just the tiny drop in the bucket. They did
Yeah.
have people to come and help, but
Yeah.
at this time,
Yeah.
there's not gonna be.
It's happening worldwide, so they're gonna be,
Worldwide.
yeah.
I mean, it was
Not just our
devast-
country, not just our
It
coast.
could devastate the United States of America to have something like that happen in two different places at one time.
Yeah.
Let alone,
To have it all happen at
Yeah.
once, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering.
And I think, I mean, you know, I don't know, this is all speculations, this isn't scriptural, this is a speculation, but you think about which countries have the most Christians, born again believers, which countries are gonna see the biggest drawing away of people,
yeah.
expertise and everything else, and I think the United States is right up there, pretty good. Sir?
On the part where it says followed by Hades,
Mhm.
I agree with what you say, but also it gives you a picture of hell on earth.
Mhm. That's a good point, it really does, yeah. Yeah, it is hell on earth, especially when God starts getting in there and moving mountains and things around and blacking out the sun. Okay, guys, we're running pretty late, so let's go ahead.